Good evening and welcome to another program on Law and Order. This week, to coincide with the month of March where we are celebrating International Women's Day, we thought of picking a topic that is relevant to women. The topic's obviously women's rights. Now, this is a broad topic. It's not been touched in this program and for that matter on many programs. So we thought we will bring an expert today to discuss on this area. My expert guest today is none other than Dr. Deepika Uttagama. She's the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. And Dr. Deepika, thank you very much for taking time off.
Thank you very much.
And how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
Yes.
I'm very pleased that you're doing this program.
Thank you. Like I said, broad topic.
Very
but
much so.
Internationally, before we come to the situation here, tell me what is recognized as women's right, and or in two words, what is women's rights?
That's a very important question actually, because there are lots of, shall I say, misunderstandings about, first of all, equality between men and women. You know, when we say men and women are equal, this has been subjected to a lot of criticism and queries, and I think rightly so, so that has to be explained. And the other is, there is this question, why should there be a separate set of rights called women's rights? Isn't that unfair by men? So this is a question that we have to face all the time. First, let me get to the idea of equality between men and women. Now, the idea about women's rights is that women as human beings are entitled to human rights, just like men. You know, any category of human beings would be entitled to rights because of the idea that we all have to live in equality and dignity, and that requires rights that we are born with. So that's a very important creation of human genius over the centuries. Now, this idea of equality, can men and women be equal? Now, the issue here is very clearly, physiologically we are different. Right. Because there are hormonal differences, you know, and then of course the way in which our lifestyles are created by the idea of gender, you know, how society looks at men and women. So our lives are also quite different. Physiologically, women can carry, bear children, and they have a very important role when it comes to reproduction, which men, unless artificially manipulated, cannot engage in. So there are differences. The point, however, when we say men and women are equal, is that in terms of human dignity and human worth, men and women are equal. So that has to be clarified from the beginning. And in terms of human capacity also, we are fast recognizing that men and women are quite equal. There are very physically strong men, physically strong women, physically weak men, physically weak women. There are extremely brilliant men, extremely brilliant women, and not very brilliant men, and not very brilliant women. So, you know, it gets distributed. But then the point is this, in society over the centuries, over millennia really, there are these concrete ideas that have come about which puts us into boxes. Men are good at certain things. Men are good at physical activities. Women are not. Women are very good in the home front. Men are not. And this is what we call this gender, you know, the gendered way of looking at our lives. And this putting us into boxes perpetuates these differences, perpetuates this discrimination. So that is what women's rights address. So women's rights are not very special, to be honest. What women's rights recognize is that, you know, women too, as human beings, have all the human rights that men do possess as human beings. However, because of this gendered way of looking at women, women are discriminated against and they are disadvantaged in enjoying all their rights. So, for example, for a woman to get into the political arena is much more difficult than for a man. Women to break through into certain areas of employment is much more difficult than men. For women in the home front to enjoy equality and dignity is much more difficult than for men. So, therefore, women's rights basically say, okay, these are the measures that states must undertake in order for women to enjoy their human rights equally. So, women's rights would say there should be special measures taken to ensure that women get into politics in public life, that women get educational opportunities, that women and men certainly should get an education that is not gendered, that education should recognize the worth of men and women as equal human beings and so on. So women's rights, other than I think for maternity leave, pregnancy related, maternity related benefits that women's rights recognize, I don't think there's a vast difference between the general body of human rights and women's rights. But women's rights recognize the specific difficulties women go through in enjoying their rights, and women's rights try to correct those.
Is there an international convention?
There is a very strong international convention which Sri Lanka ratified several decades ago, which is called CEDAW for short. It's a convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And Sri Lanka has been participating in those reviews, because once we ratify an international treaty, as you know, it means that we are legally bound to follow the terms of those conventions, like in any other area, like trade or environmental protection and so on. Now, Sri Lanka has participated in the CEDAW committee reviews, because once you ratify, then you are subjected to international scrutiny. Are you really implementing the convention in your country? So we have had certain victories, and then we are also lagging behind in certain areas. For example, specifically these customary laws. That's a huge issue, because customary laws impact on groups of women in various communities to a very extensive level. Their land, for example, property ownership, rights within the family, etc., severely affected. So that there are also discriminatory statutes like the Land Development Ordinance, which says that the firstborn son is to be preferred when parents devolve their property land, state land that they've got on their children. The firstborn the son has should get priority, etc. Such laws, of course, are very rare in Sri Lanka, other than customary laws. But the point is in practice in Sri Lanka, even though we don't see very many discriminatory laws, in practice women are very behind in many fields. Let me give you an example. I think the primary example is in the workforce. Now, when you look at university enrollment, about 60% of women, 60% of students are women. Now, in our field, law faculties, law departments in public university system in Sri Lanka, other than the Open University, have over 85% women. But you know very well, in the practice, there are very few women. And in fact, in the entire workforce of this country, according to central bank statistics, just 37% of the workforce consists of women. Now, I understand this also includes women who are working in the informal sector. 37%.
Despite a country having its first woman prime minister, woman president, woman chief justice, all that.
And also having 52% women.
Right.
And then 60% of women graduates each year. So
qualified.
This shows there is a huge contradiction in terms that there is something happening to women. In certain areas, we've won. These are the victories. Literacy, educational field, women are doing far better than men. There's no doubt about it. Our honors graduates are mostly women. But when it comes to public life, when you look at the employment sector, the labor sector, when you look at the public sector, that is the political sector, that means decision-making sector, women are really behind. Parliament has just about 5.8% women. Provincial councils have just about 3%. And now, thanks to the recent amendment to the local government election law, now 25%. Earlier, local government had just about 2% of women. Right. Now, the point is, people would say, well, if women are better at home, then why complain? Now, the point is, women also, desire to engage in all fields of walks, all aspects of life. Now, why then get an education? Why then get an education? So, the general message that many young women get is go for the education, get yourself a degree or a diploma or some certificate, but your life should be governed by the traditional way of, looking at men and women. So you should be a traditional woman, and if you break those barriers, then you are going to be in difficulty. And I must say very frankly, having lived for several decades now in this country, we are going backwards. Very definitely we see that. Many gains made by women, like for example, entering many fields of professional life, etc., going up in certain fields. Yes, there are women who have, really done very well. So I am told, look at yourself. You are now the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission. I recognize this is a victory for women. But if you look at the 9 independent commission, I'm the only female chair. If you look at the university system, currently there isn't a single vice chancellor who's a woman. If you look at the deans of universities, definitely there are many more men than women. So why is this happening? We have, for various reasons, we've sort of decided as
if I may interrupt,
yes.
Is it because of a lack of a law?
Not lack of a law, because you see, law can regulate, certainly, by saying, for example, 25% of representation at the local government level should be women. But the most important thing is creating a societal environment, a social environment that recognizes the equal worth of men and women. A society that says, yes, if men can, so can women. If women can, so can men. I mean, some of our most celebrated cooks are men, chefs, but they do it only commercially. You see, any trade, when it comes to the commercial dimension, men take over. But women, I mean, millions of people are nurtured on, mothers cooking. But when it comes to the commercial dimension, it's very difficult for women to break through into this, sort of there is a sort of elite league of chefs. It's very difficult. So why is that? And that is because of societal attitudes, what we call gendered way of looking at life. Women are good for this, men are good for that. These are the strengths of men, these are the strengths of women. So we compartmentalize. Now, having lived my life, as I said, for several decades, I really don't see this difference. If a woman wants to do it, she can do it.
Right. You mentioned about international convention,
yes,
which we have ratified
yes.
Decades ago. What was the necessary domestic law to be made based on that convention, and have you made that law?
No, that is the major issue. Major issue. Now we have, of course, made improvement to certain statutes after ratifying CEDAW. So, for example, we had the Citizenship Act. Earlier under the Citizenship Act, citizenship could be passed on to children only by the father's citizenship, through the father. So now that was changed over a decade ago to make sure that mothers also could pass their citizenship to their children. This was a very emotional issue, because mothers couldn't pass on their citizenship to their children. If a Sri Lankan mother, was married to a foreigner, she could not pass her citizenship to the children. So that was corrected. Then, for example, in 1995, the penal code was amended extensively to include a lot of offences that recognized violence against women and that it is a huge societal problem, and in order to deter that, very strengthened punishments, etc., were, introduced. Then we have the Domestic Violence Act, but it is not only for women. In the Domestic Violence Act, anybody within a family could complain if there is violence within the domestic sphere, within certain types of relationships. But we find that many more women complain about domestic violence than men, because those are the realities. Many more women get beaten up and and so on than men do. So those statutes are there, but we don't have a single statute which translates the CEDAW Convention into domestic law. There's a draft.
Okay. What are those necessary things to be translated?
First of all, there has to be a law that looks at discrimination of women in all fields of life: educational, healthcare, politics, and also the business environment, economic life of women. All those must be encompassed in one statute, ideally. Then there has to be a very clear-cut definition of discrimination. What is discrimination? So, for example, it took us a long time to realize that domestic violence is a form of discrimination. Sexual harassment in the workplace is a form of discrimination. You are harassed because you are a woman.
Yeah.
So, like that, there has to be clear-cut definition. And that particular statute should also importantly point to the special measures that the state must take to ensure that women are represented in all fields. In Sri Lanka, we are very poor, very weak.
So you mean to say haphazardly parts of that, whatever the convention you said, has been incorporated in existing domestic laws,
yes,
but the totality of what is necessity on that has not been
incorporated.
If it were to be done, has to be done by amending existing, for example, existing labor laws and laws like that, or as a special act?
Well, you can do it either way. You can keep on amending existing laws, but I think it is much better when you have ratified a treaty to have one incorporating piece of legislation that is like, it captures everything.
Right.
It captures everything. And this particular bill, that I think its genesis goes back to 2004, because I was on a committee that reviewed that bill. Now it's still pending.
What's the bill called?
It's called the Women's Rights Bill.
Still pending?
It's still pending, and it has been diluted over the years. The CEDAW framework has disappeared from the bill, and this is something that the Human Rights Commission is extremely concerned about. And it is couched only in terms of the Women's Charter of Sri Lanka. Women's Charter is not as strong as the CEDAW Convention. And the CEDAW committee has consistently told the state of Sri Lanka, you are remiss in this regard. You have ratified the convention, which is extremely good measure, very progressive for women in the country. And however, you have failed to implement it completely in your national legal system. So, the bill intends to actually address that lacuna or that gap, together with the creation of a Women's Rights Commission. Because now we see that in the Human Rights Commission, we do take up women's issues, but it's so much better, like the Child Protection Authority, to have a specialized agency to look at women's rights issues.
Is there agencies like that in other countries?
There are, like India, for example, has quite a powerful women's commission at a federal level, and states also have their women's commissions at a state level. So they not only look at
them equal in their rights, which are not there now, if I were to ask you to brief it.
Yes, but first of all, I think the definition of discrimination has to be strengthened.
Yes.
And that has to be in compliance with CEDAW, because it's extremely
the original bill had that, right?
The earlier bill was framed in the CEDAW term,
Okay,
so therefore it would automatically have that. Then I think this whole idea of affirmative action, special measures, is very weak in the current bill. So it addresses women's equality in certain specific areas, but not adequately. Now in CEDAW,
what is special measures and affirmative action?
So for example, special measures would be like quotas.
Right.
Now you have a quota for local government elections. Ideally, it should go to the provincial council level. There's a proposal for 30%, and then for parliamentary elections, and at all levels. Now Australia, for example, has a policy called the panel pledge. Panel pledge means if you're constituting a panel on any subject, that you should have a adequate number of women also representing any given area. Now, if you look at certain networks, like now sports commentators are generally all men. But if you look at a network like CNN, most of their sports commentators today are women. If you look at the commentators who are commenting on the Winter Olympics in South Korea, they are mostly women. Why? Because they've taken a policy decision to provide representation to both men and women, so that we become an inclusive society. rather than an exclusive society. So, if you look at specific areas in CEDAW, education, not only does it address equal access to education, but it also prescribes what type of an education should men and women get. So, the content of our education in Sri Lanka is either gender neutral, in the sense it doesn't address gender issues at all, and it doesn't really focus on issues of discrimination. It doesn't give students the knowledge and the skills necessary to negotiate your way in life. So, we have this large body of women who are entering even higher education, but who are not empowered, because education is still very traditional. So, education would tell you, as a woman, these are the areas that are very good for you. You can become a teacher, you can become a doctor. So, there are those areas. Even within medicine, I'm sure you are aware that very few surgeons are women, because they're told it's very strenuous. You have to stand for such a long period of time. You have to operate in the night. This is not good for women, and so on. Even women who do like to enter these fields are discouraged. Now, CEDAW addresses all that. The content of education, what should it be? That the content of education should be extremely sensitive to these issues and give an education to both men and women, which talks about rights issues. How.
So, yes. You're saying large portion of CEDAW convention is still pending because we have not made the domesticated law. What is the present action? Can the Human Rights Commission take anything, or people who are concerned, we'll say women lawyers or whoever who are concerned, or civil societies should do, as a final question I'm asking this, because we are running out of time, that you think should be done to empower women and to strengthen the women's rights in Sri Lanka?
Exactly. Two things, two-pronged. We can't